All right, so in today's webinar, we will be discussing communications. So in short, we're basically going to be talking about everything under the communications header here. That said, now that I've said we're going to be covering everything under, we're actually not covering sending acknowledgements. Sending acknowledgements and donation acknowledgement and the templates therein are actually their own webinar, which we will not be covering today. But we will be discussing labels and letters, newsletters, and we will touch on year-end thank you, which is a very simple process. It does kind of tie into sending acknowledgement, but we'll probably be able to get it in today. If we have time, we will also be talking a little bit about sending communications from a contacts record. Actually, we definitely will be able to cover that because that's actually where we're going to start. So before we get into communications, let's talk a little bit about a contacts record and some of our preferences there. So let's use me as our guinea pig. So we're going to go to my record and we're going to talk about communication preferences as we start with. So let's go ahead and actually, once we view my record, let's go ahead and edit it as well. But specifically what I want to talk about is also communication preferences. So this is actually probably better shown from the edit screen. So obviously, in order to communicate with a contact, we need to have certain information. For example, we need to have an email if we plan to email them. We have to have a mailing address if we want to mail them. So let's go ahead and edit my record and we'll see where you can put these pieces and what have you. So let's bring that up. Okay, so first off, we do have phone, which is not applicable for our purposes today. Someday in the future, we may have text messaging capability. It has been discussed, but at this time is not present. But we have email and mailing address, and these are our two basic sections that we're interested in today. Mailing address, obviously, anytime we're going to send mail to somebody, we need to make sure that we do have a mailing address. And for email, we have to make sure, well, we have an email address. So that's your first thing. If you're going to communicate with people, you want to make sure these are present, and the email needs to be marked as primary in order for us to send to it. Also, in order for us to mail or email someone, their communication preferences must be set to mail yes or email yes. They will normally default to not set, which indicates we don't know, which is kind of a soft no. Otherwise, if they've explicitly told you no, then you'll set that to no. But generally speaking, you'll want these set to yes. When you add an email, it should, in most situations, default to yes. So keep that in mind. We also have, when we set email to yes, subscribe for newsletter and the various categories for newsletter that they have subscribed to. We're going to talk more about these in a few minutes, but be aware of where they're located. So yeah, that's just the basic things to know about in a contact record. Email will be required to send email, marked as primary. Mailing address should be present, and send mail, send email should be marked as yes. And for newsletter purposes, you need to be subscribed for the individual categories. Any questions on this screen before we move on to actually creating categories? Okay, cool. So let's then move to, actually from this screen, before we move on away from a contact record, let's go back to view contact. And there's a cool trick here. I don't know if it's really a trick, but it's a cool tool for emailing contacts individually. I actually used this just a few minutes ago to send someone credentials for this meeting. So when you're on someone's record, assuming they have an email, and it's marked as yes, up here we will see that email, and we can click on that email to bring up a send email screen. So hold on, we need to wait for my record to catch up with us. I mentioned earlier, computer's running a little slow today because I'm rendering a video. But we click on that email address and it will bring up a send email screen. So nothing too fancy, good for basic communications. It will show in their engagement history and so on. Which reminds me, because I almost always forget this, all communications that you send to contacts will show what I put on in their engagement history. So acknowledgements, emails, newsletters, interactions and tasks, which we're not covering today, and so forth. So know that. You can always check this section for those details and see what you've been sending them. Okay. Another detail while I'm here is you may notice this check mark of verified next to my email address. There are three statuses an email address can have: unverified, verified, and bad. Now we have some new functionality coming out next month to handle bad, but in short, what they tell us is, have we sent to this email, and what error code, if any, did we get back from the recipient server? So without going into the details of how email works, basically you send someone an email, you get a code back. You don't actually see it. Our server does though. And depending on what that code is our status on this. So if we have no code back, i.e. we've never sent to it or we have never received a code back, which often we don't, it's unverified. We can still send to the email address, no problems. So you can kind of ignore those. Verified means we have gotten a code back, 250, saying A-OK. Actually, that is the code. It's OK. And it says the email is good. And we can send to that as well. If we get anything else, one of the 500 level error codes, 550 is a very common one, 554 for spam, it will be marked as bad, indicating that it's a bad email, probably bounced, and we will not send to it any further. So an important concept to remember: if an email is marked as bad, we don't send to it. So if it bounced, and we know it bounced, which we usually do, often do, we will not send to it. That's going to be very important for newsletter later on. Okay, so let's put that aside. Now let's go to configuration and talk about creating newsletter categories. And then we're going to move into newsletter. So that's why we need all these pieces, because they're all going to come into play with newsletter. And we'll see how they tie together in a minute. So newsletter categories is right here. And this is where you can create any categories you need. By default, a system does not come with any categories. And you can kind of think of categories. I don't like talking about them in terms of being a list like you'd find in MailChimp or Constant Contact, because that's not the most accurate way to think of them. In a lot of ways, they're almost a filter. So they're basically saying, what has someone given us permission to send them? And our categories usually represent, well, categories of information that we might send to someone. So here, my categories are events. This would have event updates, fundraising information, general updates, and monthly updates. These are probably the same thing. And releases. Now, okay, this probably also would be tied into these three. Would probably be tied together. I recommend you don't make too many categories. Make them for the major kind of subsets of communication you send out: fundraising, events, volunteer opportunities, and general updates, something like that. You could always get away with a single category called general. We'll talk more about it later, but when you send a newsletter, assuming you put in an unsubscribe link, like I said, we'll talk about that, your recipients will get the option to unsubscribe from all categories or specific ones. If you kind of think of more, if you need an example, think about when you've ever signed up for a service online and they had checkboxes, things like send me general updates, send me product releases, send me promotional things. Those are categories. You're telling them what you're interested in getting from them, if anything. I usually turn it all off. And so that's kind of a way to think about categories. Keep them general. Do not create them for specific events. I've seen people do that. And be aware that if you create new categories, if they've unsubscribed in the past and you resubscribe them for that new category, they might be irritated. So just keep that in mind. When creating a new category, give it a name. And is it auto-subscribe? So this basically means that if I add them to my system, they are automatically subscribed to it. If this is a new category and I select this, even if they've previously unsubscribed for everything else, they will be subscribed for the new category. So that's why I was my warning there. So I usually recommend create your categories early and probably don't really change them too often. We can't delete a category. You can rename it though. So any questions about categories? And we'll see them in play in a little bit. Okay, so now that we have these pieces, let's go ahead and talk about newsletters. And this will also take us into the topic of templates. So let's go to newsletters and let's create a newsletter as well as a newsletter template. And then we'll actually talk about managing those templates overall. And then we'll move into labels and letters and end of year. And that should wrap us up for the day. So here we have our newsletter list. This is every newsletter I'm either working on or sent out. So here are a bunch of saved onlys. There's a variety of statuses for newsletters. Completed means it's been sent out, done, end of deal. Saved only means it's currently being worked on. And then there's a status of scheduled, which means it's scheduled and waiting to be sent out, and in process or progress, I forget which one it is, which is basically it is in the process of being sent out, and so on. Once one is scheduled or set to in process, you cannot edit or do anything to stop it. The scheduled ones you can contact support, and I think we can still stop them, but once it's in progress, sent is sent, as I say. We can view summaries for completed newsletters, which gives us some cool statistics. Let's go back. And we can edit saved onlys. So let's actually make a brand new newsletter. Let's not use one of my old ones. And let's actually send it out right now. So to create a new newsletter, create newsletter. And we have a variety of fields. So newsletter name, this is for internal reference. This is basically what you'd call this newsletter. So we might call this the monthly update July 2017. No, I went in the future. I was time traveling. Excuse me. I do that sometimes. So that's our internal reference. Then we put our sender information. So this is what the recipient will see as the sender. And this is normally going to be your organization and an email at your organization that if they hit reply on the newsletter, it's going to go to. I recommend your sender name either be the staff member or the name of the organization. So Monte Cristo Arts Center, my example dummy system. And our email is, probably something like info@ or contact@. I usually recommend it be a general email, but you could put your specific, which is what I'm going to do right here. Metzler@fundly.com. Ooh, there we go. And then the subject, that's the subject line on the email. This is where sometimes people get themselves in a little bit of trouble with spam filters. One, avoid exclamation marks like the plague. They are bad. Avoid all caps. Because basically, for anyone who's watching this who's not aware, because some people aren't, caps on the internet basically means yelling, not usually in a good way. So, and that's one thing that spam filters look out for. So if I do all caps, exclamation marks, especially multiple exclamation marks, a spam filter will probably reject this email as spam. Further, it's going to make it look like you're mad at somebody. So keep that in mind. Subject should be something, that lets them know what this newsletter is about. So maybe the monthly arts update from Monte Cristo Arts Center. Monte Cristo Arts, yeah, MCAC. Arts Center. I sometimes do also warn, be careful with long acronyms because this is another thing that spam filters look out for, gibberish. And while that might be a legitimate abbreviation, that looks like gibberish to a spam filter, and they might reject it. This, like a 4-letter should be fine, but anything longer than that could be a problem. Campaign, you can link it to a campaign. I don't normally do that. And then the category. So this is going to come into play in the next step, but basically, if someone is subscribed to a category, they can receive the newsletter. If they're not, they can't. And now we have to say what newsletter category this newsletter is meant for. So monthly updates. So anyone subscribed to this category can receive it. If I've unsubscribed, I cannot. And then the template. And so this is such a simple, deceptively simple drop-down, but this is actually the bulk of your newsletter right here. So you can select from an existing newsletter or create new. Let's go ahead and create new. So I'm going to create new, and we pick our base template to start with, and you can check these out, and I'll show you how to clear them out if you've experimented. These ones are just simple letters templates. They're pretty raw, but some people kind of like a more letter looking kind of thing to look, newsletter to look at. Excuse me. So these ones sometimes can be helpful. They do not come with built-in unsubscribe links, so we will cover how to handle that. And then these other ones kind of have some formatting already in place. You can kind of see them from the pictures. A lot of people do enjoy these ones. I'm going to start with template layout. Actually, I'm just going to use number 1. It's just a letter layout, and then we're going to rip it apart and play with it. So let's do select template on that one. They do all have preview options. There's a magnifying glass, by the way. So here we have it. If you played with donation acknowledgement, it's actually one of the letters of the template available there. We're going to tear it apart in a minute. But before we do that, we want to name it untitled. That's terrible. There are going to be a bazillion untitles. We never tell them apart. So what we want to do is edit it, the edit button here, and give it a code. Now, code is a unique identifier. They show up all over the system. And so for my newsletters, every newsletter template will have a code. I usually recommend, just an abbreviation of maybe, the name of the template. So let's call this monthly update newsletter. And then, if it's a specific one and we're going to keep them each separate, I might say, 7/27. I keep going to the future. There you go. So monthly update newsletter 7/2016. So it is a system. You can make your own. Then the name, well, monthly update 7/2016. And you can do whatever you want. I could just call this monthly update and update it each time, and you'll see what I can do with there. And then we can categorize our newsletters. This does not have to match your category on the newsletter itself. You don't even have to use it, but it's a way to organize it. So I might actually recommend it. Have your categories for your newsletters match the category that it's going to be sent from. And that way you can kind of help organize. So monthly update. And there we have it. I already used that one. And then save. So now our newsletter's got a name. It's got all the pieces we need to be able to easily distinguish it later. From here, let's play with the editor. This is, if you ever use MailChimp, by the way, this is basically the same editor. Actually, I think it is their editor. They have a plugin, third party, you can have available. So I think we use that with some slight modifications. And it's widget-based. What you see is what you get, drag and drop. Very simple to use. You can copy, edit, and delete sections. So I'm going to delete that one and delete that one. And I can edit a section, and it brings it up in the editor on the right. We'll play with this in a few minutes. And I can add new sections by dragging and dropping. So for example, image, I can drag it in and drop it. And then I can upload an image. So let's go ahead and put my logo. Let's put the organization's logo. Where did I put my logo? I am missing my logo. There it is. Open, and instead of the cute little kid, we're going to put in our logo. It brings up the logo in an editor. You can make some modifications to it. So am I not going to do anything? I made that myself. I'm proud of it. Not really. It's very simple. Not much of a graphics person. So that's going to pop in there. It's going to be huge. So let's bring it in a bit. So we can manually assign both image height and width. If we just do the width, so let's bring it down to maybe 300, cut it in half. By not also dictating the height, it's going to maintain what's called aspect ratio. Otherwise, you're going to get skews. It's going to become skewed. So notice it's all stretched in that direction. If I bring it down to maybe 150, that's okay. It's still a little skewed technically. But if we don't put anything, I guess it already was at 150. Anyway, the system will do the we'll do the maintain the ratio. So that's what I recommend. And we do have some styling we can do, like we can put borders on it and stuff like that, but I'm not going to do that at this time. And close. So that's the image one. For the editor, let's play with that. I'm just going to edit this text section. I could have dropped one in. It's a simple, basic, word processing editor. So nothing too fancy there. We can put tables and images in, which leads to some fun tricks. For example, I could put a table of images, and that would let me have like 3 images by 2 images if I wanted to, side by side. I could put an image in and make it a link. Where's the link? There's the link, which basically makes a button. These can also, and recommended to be done with the widgets, so we'll see that in a minute. We can switch to source code if you need to put HTML in. Be careful there. Not every browser will support all, and not every client will support all HTML. We can full screen the editor, which is a great way when you're putting your content in. You can paste from third parties like Word. If you're going to do that, do your formatting in our editor. I cannot guarantee that formatting in Word will transfer over. Most of the time, it kind of cuts it down, simplifies it. So keep that in mind. But one of the really powerful things about this editor is placeholders. So dear lorem ipsum, well, let's actually put the person's name. Well, we don't know the person's name until we send it. So we have placeholders to handle that. For example, I can put in their informal salutation, which we would defined elsewhere in the system, which I'll try to remember to point that out before we depart today. And in a context record, you can also override their informal salutation, so Bob becomes Robert or vice versa, and it will put in Robert or Bob, whatever their informal salutation is when you send the newsletter. So we have a lot of placeholders in here. Client, by the way, is you as an organization. So this is all about you. Contact name, formal and informal, their address, the current date. Ignore that, it actually shouldn't be here. Their household citation, also very important. The unsubscribe URL, we're going to play with that in a little bit. And if you're sending to organizations, the organization's information. I recommend using formal and informal. Both organizations and individuals have those, so you don't have to worry about this newsletter being specifically built for orgs or individuals. So my recommendation there. So that's the editor, basic editor. Let's actually build an unsubscribe link for this page. Since I used a newsletter template that does not come with one by default, we're going to have to add one in. The system won't force you to, but it is best practice and industry standard, and people won't yell at you if you make sure you actually put it in. So I'm going to use a text section, and we're going to do some fun stuff with this text section. So we're going to drop it in, and I'm just going to select everything, delete, and let's put a little flavor text in here. To unsubscribe, please click here. So let's do this. Let's take here. Well, first off, let's do this thing. We're going to need the placeholder. Now, you may know it offhand and be able to type it in, but what I like to do is select it. Placeholder will be placed wherever my cursor was. And I'm actually just going to cut this away and go back to the here. And I'm going to select it. And I'm going to use the link option. And I'm just going to paste it in using the other option, because this URL is going to fill in that HTTP for us, and hit OK. And so now this will become a clickable link that will have a URL generated by the system specific to the recipient, allowing them to unsubscribe. So that's a really handy trick to make your unsubscribe links look pretty like this. If I had just left it raw, you would have just had the raw link, which some people like. So you can do click here, or or copy the following URL into your browser, and then I could put that. So that's also an option. So let's format that up. So I'm not sure why I'm being so picky. So that's one way. Now, this is a little intrusive. So what can we do to modify that? Well, one thing we can do is we can change the font size. So I can do it from here, or I can go to styling and change it from here. So let's bring it down. Ooh, that is way too tiny. Let's bring it like 11. So that's one option. And let's center it. It's a common practice. And we can go back to this styling, and we can do a lot more here. So I can give this a background color. Let's maybe make it, this kind of slightly grayish red. And we can put a border on it. We can do a solid 1 pixel. 1 pixel. So pixel is a unit of measurement on computers. It's basically a dot. Your screen is measured in pixels. You may have seen it on if you've ever bought a monitor, it may have said, supports up to resolution 1000 by something or something like that. Font sizes here are measured in pixels, not points. Word uses points, which is 1/72 of an inch. Fun fact, bit of trivia for you. Pixels vary by the screen resolution. So on a low resolution monitor, this would be larger font. On a high resolution monitor, it's going to be smaller. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, 1 pixel border. It's not too thick, and we can give this a kind of a black. Let's go black all the way to there, to 000, and that will give us a. It kind of gets hidden, I guess, because of the gray. Hold on, let's do slightly wider. Let's do a 2. Oh, why can't I see that? Well, anyway, ignore that. There should be a font border there. I'll have to look into that. but that's the kind of things you can do with styling. A couple other things are the spacing. So the spacing basically puts space between this widget and the one above it or below it. So I could put more top space, and it's basically going to space the widget down. Now, mind you, that spacing is part of the widget, so that's why there's more background. So keep that also in mind. So there we go. If we had wanted to push this low down the page, that's also where spacing, for example, comes into play here, or I could add in empty text sections, other things of that nature. Let's play with some of the other widgets here, shall we? We have divider. Come on, there we go. Which is basically just a line, nothing too fancy here. Once again, we have spacing and background options. I'm going to leave that be. We did image. We have button. So, button is really handy. I told you that earlier we can use images to make buttons, but we can also just use this one. And alignment center, click me. I use this on like registration emails. Let's see. Donate today could be our button, and our link could be www.ourdonationpage.com. Whatever our donation page URL is going to be. Right, in this case, it's going to go to fundly.com, but that's an option. And then we do have styling here as well. So the background color, this is on the button. Let's do a blue, actually. I'm feeling blue. Can I do that blue? And come on, you can do it, Eric. All right, it's not quite the same blue, but it's a bit more. There we go. That's a bit closer. If you happen to know the hex code for your color, which if you want to make it match your website, your web developer will have those. I could always put that hex code in directly. And border color, border styling. So I could do, borders. I think there's you can curve the borders. So now it's more rounded. So a lot of cool styling things you can do. I'm not going to go through every single one of them. I just kind of want to give you the flavor of them. But play with them. Work on some templates. Close. So that's button. Social media is links to your social media pages. So, hashtag, so, if I put in facebook.com/Fundly, I'm going to guess that's it. This will go to that page. If I don't want to put our LinkedIn or Twitter, I can drop those. So maybe all I have is Facebook, and that'll go to your Facebook page. And then some styling stuff to play with. Let's see which one. 2-column, this is a fun one. So it can be a little, there we go, drop that in. And this is good for articles. So this is where we can put kind of your more standard just article content if I wanted to. So we have left hand, right hand. Fun trick. You can tinker with these, how wide they are, which leads to a very interesting trick, mostly used for donation acknowledgement, where sometimes the body of your document will be a left-hand column board of directors list and a right-hand column, a right-hand area of the content. Well, you can support that using this 2-column option. So I could put left-hand width at, say, 100 pixels, by the way, or 100%. Well, we don't want to do that. Actually, let's pull it to 300. No, that's too wide. Let's go to 200. There we go, 200, and then put this to 100%. Ooh, no, I didn't want that. Actually, you need this to be also the fixed. Let's do it a bit wider. So sometimes you have to play with your numbers. No, that was too wide. 700. There we go. And what this will give you is a left-hand column, like board of directors or table of contents or whatever you want to do, and then your content will be here. So that's more of a donation acknowledgement trick, but just wanted to show that to you. And then obviously styling and so on. So I'm going to set this back, by the way, to 49% and 49%. So we'll leave that the way it is. So, by the way, you also have a layout for the entire page, which does include the maximum page width. This is a pretty good wide width. It should look pretty good on mobile devices. These are mobile responsive is the term. So the mobile devices will attempt to put this all into one single column, so it will kind of squidge them down a bit. But you can modify your width and bring it so that they're all shorter. Depends on what you want to do. If you were playing with notice how I had a fixed amount of width to work in. You saw if I put 200 and 700 together, it or 800, it was a bit too wide because that's also taking account that there's some spacing involved. So from the spacing here, so we lose some of our space to that. So you sometimes have to play with your spacings a little bit, but those are all the tools you may need to do so. So see here, let's go back to widgets. And our last widget, image text button. This is a really fun widget. And it's actually one we deleted already, but let's add it back in. So this has three components. It has an image, it has a text area, and it has a button. Now the button's not currently present. So let's add the button in. We need a link in here, so www.fundly.com, and that puts our button in. And this might be read more. So right now this looks kind of terrible, so let's play with it a little bit. So this can be used for a couple of purposes. One purpose is, we saw when we started this template, is it was being used as a header. So we can have a logo and your organization information. The other way we can use this is for articles. So I can put an image, the article, and a read more button that goes to maybe the actual full content of the article, like on our blog. So that's another way we can use it, and that's the example I'm going to play with right here. So let's tidy this up a little bit. Well, first off, actually, let me close this out. Let me steal some lorem ipsum text from this one, because I need a little lorem ipsum, which if you ever read this, it's actually kind of interesting, the history on the lorem ipsum, but I find little trivias like that kind of cool. But let's go with it. Okay, so let's make some modifications. So button align, image line, all that. These alignments can be used to switch where the image is. So for example, I can put the, not the button align, I can put the image, where is image align? Image align right, and then I can do text align left, and let me swap out the image for lorem ipsum. I'm going to paste it in here twice to get a full article. And so, yeah, that's starting to look like an article. And one thing we can also do is we can then tinker with our widths, and we can kind of get things a bit more wrapped. So let's see, how do I need to do that? Left column width is not going to do anything here. Sometimes they don't do anything. 700. There we go. 800. Nope, too much. 750. There we go. And then text link. So, and then we might want to, so I'm just going to kind of do this. See what I need to do for the text link. I want to make my button right aligned. So there we go. So as you saw, I kind of had to massage it, play with it a little bit. But now I can then also swap it out the image, and let's get, let's just grab that image. Brings up the editor again. I like that image. It's a lot of color. Save. There we go. There we go. So this is an example of maybe an article, and I could have probably left that over there. Some people would. But basically this is what something, not quite word wrap, but close. So any let's see, is anything else I can show off on this one? Okay, so yeah, that's image button text. You can play with it. That's not the greatest layout, but let's run with it. But at this point, I can save, and it's going to drop me back to the previous newsletter screen. So actually, any questions on the editor? Although I already closed it. Okay, so we spent a fair amount of time on that editor. Kind of took us out of the newsletter flow, so to remind us, that we're filling in the sender information for our newsletter. And we selected or created a template. I can preview, create a new, edit template, and then I can put attachments on my newsletter. So A lot of times what people do is they'll either create their newsletter template or select and edit from here, but a lot of times what you can do is actually do all that from Manage Templates, which we'll visit next. So let's put that aside. Next, we go Save and Proceed, and we're going to say who we're sending it to. By default, it will send to all possible recipients, apparently 19 in my demo system. So as long as they have an email, it is marked as primary, they aren't dead, didn't really talk about that, and they're subscribed for the appropriate category, they will receive this newsletter. So in that way, your categories do act as lists. But I still prefer thinking of more of like a filter. From here, we can further filter it down to a smaller subset using criteria the same as advanced search. So I could search for contact type as donor, and this would only go to donors, or event attendee, or something like that. We can also add in raw emails um, or contacts as recipients. Be careful with raw emails. They have no data because they're not raw actually contacts, so placeholders will not fill in. So keep that in mind. Otherwise, you can search for individual contacts. From here, once we've selected our contacts, we save and proceed. Send ourselves a test email. Always recommend this. Send it to yourself. Send it to a few coworkers. Send it to your dog. Well, I don't think your dog has an email, but it might. But anybody who can take a look at it, make sure you send it to a couple different people that use different email services. So maybe somebody at Yahoo, maybe someone at Gmail, someone on Outlook. They're all a little different. They all render sometimes a little different. Our serve system does a pretty good job of genericizing the HTML so that everything should be compatible. But certain systems, Outlook and Gmail, for some reason, are kind of, I want to say, known culprits for kind of modifying the HTML a little bit. I don't know why. They just do. So it can look a little different in those systems. So, and then from here, send. Send to now. Send at a certain date and time. I'm going to send now. Hit send. And this will either send it immediately or schedule it. Now we're in process of sending it, and that's newsletters. And actually, so any questions on newsletters? Oh, we're getting a little behind schedule. Okay, so actually what we did right now is the basic flow for all the rest of the pieces we're going to cover today. So they're all going to go pretty quickly. But first, let's go to Manage Templates and talk a little bit about what we're going to find here. So I did mention that our newsletter templates will be put here, our donation acknowledgement templates will be put here, event invites and notification templates will be present here, our labels and letter templates will be present here, basically almost every template in the system is present here. So here's our donation acknowledgement templates, our communication templates, which is going to include newsletter, letters, labels, envelopes, which is using donation acknowledgement, year-end thank you, and then event notifications and invites. If I go back to communications, here we see the section, the categories that we created for our newsletters. So I can look at just monthly update newsletters, and here they are. I can edit, delete if it's not been used, copy, which is very handy, and preview. Fun trick with preview. I often get the question of, can I print a physical copy of my newsletter and say, for example, put it on my website? And the answer is yes. We can preview the template with all your content and go down here, preview, and put it into one of these formats. Doc will give it an uneditable unless you have the right software. So for example, your placeholders will still be raw placeholders, but Word Doc would allow you to maybe swap out the placeholders for something that you want, and then from there save as a Word doc, or use Word's PDF functionality, resave as PDF, and then you can put it on your website. So fun trick comes up occasionally. Wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that trick. So did not exist in version 1 for anybody who might be watching who used version 1. So yeah, that's our template editor. We already played with that template editor. I'm not going to go through it again. Any questions about managed templates before we move on? Okay, let's move on. Labels and letters. There's a lot of need to, well, generate physical letters and labels for nonprofits. And one of the more traditional ways of doing that is to do some sort of report and then a mail merge in Word or similar programs like OpenOffice. So that functionality, you can still do that. You can run advanced searches, you can run reports, take that Excel file and run it through mail merge. And that's still going to be actually probably a very handy way for large communications. We're talking tens of thousands. There's also the Appeals add-on. Where is that? Appeals add-on. It's a paid add-on that you can get that lets you create segmented appeals, which can give you, and then takes into files, which can be used with mailing houses and so on. So that's a cool feature. It's its own webinar. I'm not going to cover it today. So putting aside those more manual options, we have labels and letters. Labels and letters is a built-in mail merge. So it's good for officially any size mail merge, but a lot of times I find organizations use it for things, sub 10,000, for example, something in the 1,000 or more or less range, maybe even. But basically, it works very similar to newsletter. You'll set your batch date, batch name for internal, pick your file format, be aware labels can only be generated in PDF, so keep that in mind. Select your letter template, and you can create new and edit like we could in newsletter. Not going to go through that. Pick your label template. You only ever need one, really. Let's just take a quick peek at that. If you haven't created it before, you'll pick one of the base templates to start with, and then put in your placeholders. And so you just have one big section, put in your placeholders, and I like doing formal salutation, street address, city, state, zip. That's the standard mailing address. My understanding of the U.S. Postal Service, if you're going to do address line 2, that actually goes before address line 1, because address line 2 is usually used for things like in care of, attention to, and that's before the actual street address. Street address normally should include your street address and suite number and those details that would be needed. So you might want to check on the actual formatting you need for addresses, but this is the one that I got from the U.S. Postal Service. So anyway, putting that aside, works in all other ways as normal. Save. So yeah, that's for your labels. Labels use Avery format 6150. Was it 5160? No, I got myself backwards. You know what? I have that online on the tutorial database. I apologize. Suddenly now my brain is mixing it up if it's 5160 or 6150. I'm sure one of those don't even exist, so that probably answers the question. I think create new will tell me. I know it tells me somewhere in the system, so I apologize. I think it's 5160. Yeah, 5160. It's just a standard label, Avery label type. You can get them anywhere. 5160, yeah. So that's your labels, and this is just your letter. We played with that earlier. When you generate your letters and your labels, you're going to get files. Where those files go is based on send email to, and then who are we generating for? And we run an advanced search. I always recommend you add the following two criteria to any search. We don't do it automatically because you may have your own reasons, but so it's not like newsletter where we have some built-in filters, but I suggest you put address line 1 is not empty, so they have to have at least an address line 1, which usually means they have the rest, and active is true. This means they aren't dead. So these two are probably going to be your minimal filters when doing labels and letters. And then we can run search, and this will give me an estimate of how many, 150. So I have 150 people in my database with addresses that are not dead. And then from there, I can further refine it to being maybe all donors, maybe donors who have a last giving date older than last year, whatever you need to do. So I'm not going to put any more into this right now. And then we do generate. And so as it says, we will get an email when it's completed. This can be quite an extensive process, so it is a back-end process. And that's how we keep the system moving. At this point, I can leave this screen and do something else. If I want to see where I am with a batch, I can go to view history, and I have one sent for processing. It's the one we just did. Otherwise, I have a bunch that are processed. I can download the files and print them from there. I can view recipients and see who the actual list is, and I can even download this list as a raw file in case for some reason I do want to switch to manual mail merge. So that's labels and letters. I considered a really cool feature. It wasn't in version 1 for anyone who's wondering. It's built in mail merge. Any questions on that? Okay, we're almost done. The last piece for today is year-end thank you. So this is kind of donation acknowledgement, but I don't cover it in that webinar since usually I cover it in this one. And this is now that we have those other two pieces, newsletter and labels and letters, you will look at the screen and go, oh, hey, this looks exactly like labels and letters. And you know what? You're right. It basically is. Give it a batch name, pick your year. So let's do 2016. Pick your template. You can create, edit, and what have you. It's going to basically find every donor for that year you specified that has not previously been sent a year-end acknowledgement. So that's way, in that way, it's a lot like send acknowledgement. And we can further refine it. And then we do generate. And let's just borrow one I've done in the past. And here we go, generated for recipients. And it will take us into the communication preference selection process. So at this point, we're actually in the same process we use for donation, regular donation acknowledgements. Oops, this is apparently an empty batch. Let's delete that batch and pick a different one. So that was this top one, I believe. So let's delete that batch. Anybody who was in that batch would be sent back to queue. Let's grab this one. I think this should have somebody. Problem with the demo system. You do strange things sometimes, so you get strange data. Here we go. It's got one person, Gary. He's actually one of our staff members. We select how he's going to receive it. This will default to his communication preferences. If I try to set a communication preference he doesn't have, say if he didn't have a mailing address, we wouldn't be able to do this. And then I can send email. Looks very similar. So I put in his sender information, send email. It's sent out. Our batch is now sent for processing, or also known as partially processed once that's sent out. And then I can go ahead and print the actual letter, PDF, which is the recommendation, because they're nice and consistent, Word doc, which can be edited, but can be sometimes inconsistent due to different versions of Word, download an envelope, which in itself would have a template involved. Usually you only need one. They are for a number 10 envelope, standard. And then we also have you can print them as from HTML, which prints from the browser, not the recommended option. And then when you're done printing, tells the system that this year end has been sent. So, fairly simple process. If I went back to view history, let's do that. I can always go back into this batch and resend. By doing that, okay, let's wait for my computer to catch up with me. I can always, so it's partially processed, right? Oh, no, that's not the one. Send for processing means the email is currently being processed. When it's done, it will say completed. If the email had been sent but the mail hadn't been marked as done printing, it would be set to partially processed. If you ever get a failed, email support@fundly.com. It's rare, but occasionally something's gone wrong, and it's usually a data issue that we can help you sort through, but sometimes it's something we need to look into. But otherwise, if I have a batch that was completed, I could go view recipients and either re-email or reprint individual letters as needed. So that's year-end thank you. Oh, I missed something on that. One thing I do want to talk about for year-end thank yous is in the placeholders for year-end thank you. It uses all the donation acknowledgement placeholders, so please see the webinar on that, which I do have recorded. Excuse me, that's not the page I want. So actually, let's do this. Let's go to that first screen. That's the one I want. Okay. When you're working on your template for your year-end acknowledgement, I'm not going to, like I said, I'm not going to go into all the placeholders because that's covered in donation acknowledgement, but there's a specific placeholder you will want. And it is called transaction grid, although it comes out showing transaction data. What this will give you is a table with all the donations for that year. And it will give you the amount, the date, amount, date, program, and any tributes. So in honor of, behalf of, in memory of, and that person. So it's give you those 4 pieces of information, currently not editable. So I want you, and you're going to basically want that placeholder present. Gift amount will give you the summed up amount total of all their gifts for that year. And then you probably do something like gift current year. Well, you wouldn't use current year because you're probably generating it. Anyway, you'd probably hard code year as needed. So this is not a great example of a letter, but it shows somebody's attempt at it. So gift amount, transaction data, those are the 2 biggies, along with things like formal salutation and informal salutation. Okay. Alrighty. Any questions about year-end thank you? As mentioned, it's basically a hybrid of the processes we've seen currently, along with donation acknowledgement. So combine this webinar and that webinar, and you'll have everything you need. Okay, cool. One last thing, just to point it out, is default salutation. This is where you can set your default salutations for the whole system. I kind of mentioned them earlier. I just wanted to point out where they're located. And then we covered everything in here. So, and then that's appeals if you have that add-on, which is a paid add-on. Otherwise, that's everything I've got. Any questions on anything we covered today? Alrighty, so I will talk to you all later.